Hello again and welcome to another Mordy and Glory, the Old World video. In today's episode, we shall be doing a tournament after action report. That's right, it's time for some more dispatches from the front lines. But I don't mean to alarm you, for this video is going to be a little bit different. You see, this isn't going to be a Warhammer 40k tournament after action report. Oh no. I went to my first Old World tournament. That's right. I've hit the competitive Old World scene and it has been glorious. It was a ton of fun. Heady heights, terrible lows, and an amazing time all around. This is going to be the first of what I hope to be many Old World tournament after action reports, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. And you know what? I'm so excited to talk about this tournament that I'm not going to mess around any further. No more preamble. Let's summon the elect accounts and charge right into today's video. As is tradition with these tournament reports, I want to start off with some quick thank yous. Firstly, I want to say a big thank you to Element Games for not only hosting the tournament, but also running it. And it was run very well. Round timings were on point. Pre-tournament briefing was amazing. Really set the tone of the event to be a really nice, fun environment. And also, they had 4 tournament organizers on standby to help with any rules questions. That is way more than you get with 40k tournaments. Normally at 40k these days you have sort of one TO, maybe an assistant TO or someone who's in the community that's just well known for knowing rules, and that's about it. But in Old World, obviously it's a new game system, there's a lot of potential questions, people are still learning it, and so having 4 TOs really shows that Element put a lot of thought and planning and just consideration into this event. I also want to say a huge thank you to every single one of my opponents. Everyone was just an absolute gent to play against, and it just made for a really great tournament experience. The whole thing from the beginning to end was just nice, just good, and a huge part of that was the people that I played against and the people that I interacted with at the event. I also want to do a shout out and a big thank you to my mate Alex, who came with me to the tournament. Alex and I are both big time Imperial Guard players, and we both got into Warhammer the Old World at the same time, and it's been so good having a kindred spirit to really immerse myself in this game with, and going to the tournament with a good mate meant that afterwards there were so many stories, we were chatting about the games, everything, and of course we got Victory Chicken together as well. So big thank you to Alex, because having a mate there really was the cherry on top to the whole thing. But with all of that said, let's now get into the video proper, and we'll start off by taking a look at my army list. As per usual, I have made a separate video already going into the fine detail, the nitty-gritty of the army list, going through each unit step by step and give you some thoughts and strategies. And so I'll make sure there's a link to that video down in the description below, and this will be more of a brief overview to give you an idea of what was in the army. So beginning with the characters, I had a general of the Empire, and he had a hand weapon, full plate armor, a brace of pistols, he was on foot, and he had the white cloak with the duelist blades. I really like this loadout for a foot general character. He's not the choppiest, and I have to say the number one reason I'm taking him is for his Leadership 9 bubble, which is pretty much essential in this army, but he can hold up in a fight if he needs to, and more importantly, he also can get you a couple of extra cheeky combat res points by getting a kill here and there, because he does have the duelist blades, putting him up to 5 attacks. He also has a brace of pistols, which he can use offensively when he's shooting them at the enemy, but he can also use those when he's in a unit to stand and shoot, which with his ballistic skill 5+ often means that he kills an enemy on the way in, getting you another point of combat res, because stand and shoot now goes towards your combat resolution. Defensively, he's on a 4+ armor save followed by a 5+ ward save. If you're a 40k player, the difference in fantasy and 40k is you get to take your armor saves and your ward saves, unlike in 40k where you can only take armor or invulnerable. Now, supporting my General of the Empire and really leaning into that leadership buff and improvement for the army, I have a Captain of the Empire who is my battle standard bearer. So he's giving me a 12-inch reroll on things like break tests and rally tests. Now, I kept this guy fairly low level. He did get a few extra bits of equipment because I had some points left over. And so in the end, he had full plate armor with an enchanted shield, giving him a 3+ armor save and a 6+ ward save. And then he just got, in terms of equipment, a pistol. I had 5 points left over. I thought about giving him something like a great weapon or a halberd, but then that would have meant he wouldn't have had as good a ward save or any ward save and not as good armor save. And considering this is my BSB, I don't want him to just be an easy, tempting target. If I tell my opponent, oh, he's got a 3+ save and a 6+ ward, they're likely to go, I might not kill him. I'll go after an extra couple of points from unit by attacking the state troops. So I've made him cheap. He's only 91 points, but he is just a little bit durable. And the last character in the army is a Master Mage who is level 2 wizard on foot with Elementalism. No other gear. That's right. No lore familiar. Nothing like that. I am rolling for my spells. And also, I'm only level 2. A lot of people will tell you that you need a level 4 in the old world. And there is definitely some merit to that argument. But a little foreshadowing, I only had level 2. Every game I went up against level 4, and in the vast majority of the games, in the vast majority of the turns, me only having level 2 had very little negative consequences for me. In fact, my mage kind of just got to hootle away and just stay away from their mage and get the spells off that she wanted to. So I have found that level 2 is actually okay if you plan around it, and the big thing is that I saved a lot of points. My wizard was only 90 points. Every wizard that I came across was 220 or more points, if not a lot more, because there was Tomb Kings on dragons, there was Chaos Sorcerers. So my wizard was cheap, and as a result, it meant I got more units. And at 1250 points, the smaller game size, sometimes having those extra numbers is a really big deal. Moving on from the characters, though, we get into the core, and I had 3 units of state troops. 2 bricks of 24 halberdiers with full command deployed in an 8x3 formation, allowing them to be nice and wide to get extra attacks, but also pick up a couple of rank bonuses here and there. I also had a unit of 22 state troops, and these were with shields and spears with full command. This was my more durable unit, and the idea with them only having 22 in is that the General of the Empire and the BSB go in there. And how I deployed these pretty much every game was the spear, leadership, bunker in the middle, halberdiers on the left, halberdiers on the right. And this made for a nice line of state troops and infantry that gave me a solid center to my deployment. For my special units, I only had one, just a cheeky little great cannon. Can't go wrong with a cannon in an Empire army. It allows you to start tackling some of those bigger monsters and also gives you a bit of fire superiority. There are a lot of war machines out there, but as I learned in this tournament, cannons are just good. And not only are they good at killing, a few models from an enemy unit here and there, but they're really good for going after monsters and enemy war machines as well, provided that you can bounce the cannon to them. Last but certainly not least, we get to the rare section. And I took a steam tank. Steam tank at 1250 points could be considered very, very spicy indeed. But it was my first time using the stank. I just had it painted up, and I thought, well, I'm going to a tournament. I should probably take what is considered to be one of the best Empire units right now. And let me tell you, this thing did not disappoint. It had no upgrades, just its steam cannon and its steam gun, and it was an absolute cast iron bitch. It crushed a lot of enemy units, and I am now head over heels in love with my steam tank. So in total, I had a General of the Empire, a Captain of the Empire, a level 2 mage, 3 unit state troops, a great cannon, and a steam tank. A nice core of infantry with a big heavy hitter and some fire support. The only weakness I saw in my army was a lack of cavalry. I haven't got my cavalry printed and painted up yet, but they are something that I'm working on. But hey, I'm an infantry guard player, so I figured being an infantry empire player wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. With all of that said, let's now move on to the next part of the video, the lay of the land. So the format of the event was a 1-day, 3-round tournament. It was 1250 points and it was 2 hours 45 minutes per round. All of the missions were picked from the main book and the scoring was done via the book as well. So you got 3 battle points if you got a crushing victory, 2 battle points if you got a minor victory, 1 battle point for each player if you got a draw, and 0 points if you got a loss. Final rankings were determined by who had the most battle points, with it then coming down to total points destroyed over the course of each game. So if you got to the end of the tournament and there were 2 players who were undefeated with 3 major victories, it would come down to who had then scored the most points for things like units destroyed, banners captured, generals killed, all that kind of stuff. Overall, I would describe this tournament as semi-competitive. I would say about 75% of the people there had just turned up to play some games of Old World and they didn't care whether they won or lost. It was just a novelty to actually have this game back and to be able to go to a tournament for it. There was also great representation from all of the factions. We had some Bretonnians and Tomb Kings, of course, but everything from Chaos Dwarves, Dark Elves, Empire of Man for myself, all factions were represented. And if I would say the factions that were most common, this is just from a cursory glance around the room, I saw a lot of vampire counts, and I saw a lot of orcs and goblins. There was also a decent amount of chaos players as well. But that just about covers all of the pre-game preamble, the preamble, if you will. Now let's get to the real reason why you're all here. The main event, and that is, of course, the games. So let's start off by having a look at the first battle. So round 1 was against orcs and goblins, and this was a pretty spicy list. Definitely one of the more competitive ones that I came across at the tournament. It consisted of a black orc war boss kitted up for combat. I believe there were some trollhide trousers and some choppiest choppers in there. And then there was also a level 4 night goblin wizard who had also had quite a lot of gear stacked onto him. I don't know exactly what the magical items were, but he definitely had the lore familiar, which allowed him to pick his spells. And the 2 spells that really did a lot of work this battle were Itchy Nuisance, which, if successfully cast, reduces an enemy unit's, I believe, like toughness and maybe another characteristic by D3. Toughness being the big one. Being able to take people down to like toughness, Empire State, for example, down to like toughness 1 is pretty tasty. There was also, I believe, Evil Sun Rising, which gives you some cheeky AP and also reroll 1s for your attacks. And I believe you can use that with ranged attacks as well, which was useful because the Night Goblin level 4 wizard was in a big unit of Night Goblins who had 3 fanatics, and the Orc War Boss, the Black Orc War Boss, was in a big unit of Black Orcs. Off the top of my head, I believe there was about 20 or 30 Night Goblins in the Goblin unit, including the boss, and then there was about 14 or 15 Black Orcs, including the War Boss, in that infantry unit. On top of this, there was a unit of 3 trolls, which meant that he had quite a decent line core there. The Black Orcs are going to be able to go more than toe-to-toe with any of my infantry, and the Goblins, whilst in theory my state troops beat them, especially considering they've only got short bows, have fanatics, which is going to be a nightmare for me to deal with, and trolls, frankly, just twat everything that they come across. But supporting all of this brutal close combat power was some equally brutal, or should I say cunning, firepower. The Orcs and Goblins had a Doom Diver and a Rock Lobber and a Bolt Thrower, giving them some significant range capabilities. For my deployment, I had a unit of Halberdiers on the right, my Spearmen in the middle, and a unit of Halberdiers on the left. I then had my cannon behind my state troops, but with the ability to fire a cannonball between the gaps of them. And then I also had a level 2 mage that was behind them as well, ready to start putting some earthen ramparts, because I did get that spell onto whichever state troop unit looked like it might need to take a Black Orc charge. And then it came down to my steam tank. Now, the steam tank was actually the last unit to go down, and At this point, the orcs had put all of their artillery on the Empire right flank. There was the trolls over there as well. And the black orcs in the centre and the goblins were on the left. And my original plan with the steam tank was I need to send this into a unit that nothing else can deal with. Nothing else has even a chance of dealing with it. And my plan was to put it against the trolls. But I got tempted. And I saw those goblins on the left flank and I thought, yeah, they've got fanatics in there, but they're only strength 5. If I can collapse that flank with the gobbos, I can then start sweeping down the other side, and I can just kind of try and kite the trolls a little bit. Well, at least that was the plan anyway. We roll off to see who gets the first turn, and thanks to the orcs and goblins having the +1, because they got all of their units down first, they are able to seize the initiative and get the first turn. But they don't do a huge amount with it. My orc and goblin opponent also thinks that he has the firepower advantage, so he just stays still with his infantry, with his night goblins, black orcs. They don't move forward at all. His trolls stumble forward. They fail their stupidity test and are forced to go forward a few inches. And then he just unleashes his artillery, and it doesn't do a huge amount. The rock lobber scatters and misses. The Doom Diver scatters and misses. He was going after my cannon. He was trying to really establish that fire superiority. And the Bolt Thrower also misses because it's at long range. And I breathe a huge sigh of relief because that is a lot of firepower which is just not quite connected. And that gives me a chance to get the first blows in when it comes to the artillery duel. Going over to the Empire turn 1. Upon sight of the enemy, I advance, sir. That's my style, sir. Steam Tank gets a good steam power roll and pootles forward on the left. Halberdiers marching up with it as well. I then get earthen ramparts off on my spearmen, so they can only move forward, and then the unit of Halberdiers on their right moves forward as well, holding the line. So the left flank is getting a little bit ahead of the right, but it's not too bad because units are mutually supporting to the Steam Tank with Halberdiers, spearmen with Halberdiers. Then it comes over to the shooting. I unleash my cannon and it basically kills one black orc. I'm still getting the hang of, dropping cannonballs in the right place, with the bounce and all that kind of good stuff. And so I slightly misjudge it and I just squash one black orc and that's it. And then I fire the steam cannon and again, I really misjudged where the cannonball should go and it just kills a couple of goblins. And that's it. So the end of round 1, there's really not been a huge amount of damage done. But it's interesting where the target priority is. I'm looking at going after my opponent's infantry because I know, well, in my experience, that Old World always comes down to the sharp end. Things are won and lost in combat. And so with my state troops not being particularly good at combat and me thinking I don't have much firepower anyway, I want to try and make the combat as favourable as possible for me. Whereas my opponent is fairly confident that his combat troops can take mine on no matter what, but he's worried about my cannon. He wants to try and make sure he has the Daka advantage. We then go over to Orc and Goblin turn 2, and my opponent's like, oh, I think I'm just going to stay where I am. And I do have a little bit of banter with him, and I say, this is very un-orky behaviour. And he's like, yeah, I know, but I got Black Orcs, they're sensible. I'm like, I know, but I'm still pretty sure that Black Orcs would want to get close and crump me. And he's like, yeah, maybe. Go on then, I'll move them forward. See what I mean? It was a good taunt, there's a bit of vibe there. My opponent could just stay back and artillery me, but he is going to push his Black Orcs forward. So he brings his Black Orcs forward, he brings his Night Goblins forward, and he doesn't get the magic off that he wants, although he is able to, he doesn't get Itching Useless off, for example, although he is able to get off his Evil Sun Rising, and his Night Goblins are actually able to plink off a wound or two from the Steam Tank. I was very unlucky, my opponent got a few 6s, and I didn't make any armor saves, so I do actually lose a couple of wounds on my Steam Tank, which was definitely surprising because normally it kind of just shrugs off short bow fire without really worrying about it. But then we get to the real orc firepower, which was the artillery, and this time it was on point. The Bolt Thrower manages to skewer a few of my spearmen, even with earthen ramparts, and then we also have the Doom Diver, which completely scatters off, but the Rock Lobber does get a good hit and manages to get a number of spearmen under its template. I do, between the 5 up ward and the 5 up armor, I am able, I think it's like a 6 up armor with the rock lobber because it's like 8 for -1. I am able to save a few, but I essentially lose a full rank, if not a bit more, from that spearman unit, and I'm beginning to get whittled down. Coming over to my turn 2, I make a couple of big mistakes, I'm going to be honest. Firstly, I see that my halberdiers are in charge range of the Black Orcs now, and I am concerned that if the Black Orcs charge me, that they're going to break my halberdiers and maybe run them down. And so I end up actually moving my halberdiers back a little bit, while at the same time continuing to move forward my other state troop line, essentially reforming the infantry. But then I go forward with the steam tank, because I'm thinking, well, the steam tank should be able to survive the night goblins and then just blast through that flank. And if it does so, that's going to be a huge win for me. It's going to be a big sort of, not like win overall, but a big localized win in the battle. Knowing what I know now, what I should have done, and sort of with a bit more experience in my belt with Empire and state troops, what I should have done is actually just left my state troops there and used them as bait. And even if my opponent's Black Orcs managed to get a flank charge on me, should have had faith that I was within Leadership 9 rerollable, and that I probably wouldn't have done much damage, but I probably would have at most fallen back in good order. If my opponent had pursued over, then he probably would have slammed inside of the steam tank. My halberdiers probably would have fallen back and just reformed, and then it would have been perfect for a counter charge. My halberdiers hold, my spearmen and stuff can go into the flank. If my halberdiers fall back quite a lot, I don't think they'll break, then I've got a good chance of again being able to counter charge and all that kind of good stuff. But I blink first and I move my halberdiers back, but at the same time I get over cocky with the steam tank. But it looks like it's a good maneuver at first, because I then unleash my artillery. I get a good cannonball placement on the Black Orcs, killing a couple of them, and then my steam tank goes bananas, and really just between the steam gun and the cannon on the steam tank, it really does a number on the night goblins, taking out almost a couple of ranks of them. At this point, I'm starting to realize that actually I had the firepower advantage. It hasn't completely dawned on me yet, but I'm thinking, oh, like I've actually done more damage with my guns than my opponent has done with his. We get into turn 3 for the Orcs, and they switch from defense to offense, and they start off by unleashing Itchy Nuisance onto the steam tank, and my opponent gets a good roll. I'm not in range to dispel it, and it takes my steam tank from toughness 7 down to toughness 4, the biggie, the real biggie. And then my opponent unleashes 3 fanatics into it, one after the other, slams them through the front of the steam tank, out of the back, and almost takes it out in one go. He follows it up with a whole bunch of short bow shots and also fire from all of his artillery, and finally he brings down the steam tank in one turn. That was a huge blow to my army. I had been banking on that steam tank surviving, even if it's just on 1 or 2 wounds, and I think it would have done if it hadn't been for my tank getting very itchy. And to make matters worse, the Black Orcs had marched forward into my face, putting the pressure onto my now beleaguered, stunned state troops. Going over to Empire turn 3, I'm not going to lie, I was flapping a little bit. I was panicking, and I end up moving the line back somewhat, hoping that I can use cannon fire and also use my pistols on my characters to try and just soften these Black Orcs properly when the inevitable charge comes in. This is when something kind of funny happens. I'm able to kill one of the Black Orcs with a cheeky pistol shot from the BSB, and then my cannon fires and it spectacularly misses. It rolls a big 10 for where it's actually meant to land, and then it bounces another 10. This caused it to smash into one of the Orc war machines and destroys it. And I realize, oh damn, I should have been shooting at these things from the get-go. And I realized, this is when I had my epiphany moment, it's too little too late. I realized that I should have just been taking my steam tank and taking my great cannon and just firing into those war machines. And then I should have been the one like backing up and being much more defensive, but I didn't realize how good cannons were, especially like great cannons, at destroying Orc war machines. They've only got like 3 or 4 wounds. I think it's like 3 wounds on each one of them, and a great cannon on average does 3 wounds, and I wound them on 2s. So I now know this, and so I realized that I did have the artillery advantage. But like I said, unfortunately, this epiphany came a little late. We go over to Orc turn 4, and the Black Orcs slam into my Spearmen. And over the course of successive rounds of combat, turn 4 for them, turn 4 for me, turn 5 for them, turn 5 for me, turn 6 for them, turn 6 for me, the Black Orcs engage in a bitter melee with the Empire Spearmen. But the line holds. Not once do my Spearmen break and flee. They fall back in good order. Sometimes they give ground, but every single one of them holds the line to the last man. I'd love to tell you that I ended up winning that combat, but that would be a lie. Essentially, in the first round, my champion accepted the challenge from the Black Orc boss. In the second round, my general issued a challenge and his champion accepted it. And then going sort of turn 5, turn 6, what eventually happened is all of the state troops were getting cut down. My general accepted a challenge against his Orc war boss, managed to do a wound, and survived one round of combat before the next round getting cut down. And the last member of the unit was the battle standard bearer. And he was eventually cut down, but he did not break, he did not flee. They stood to the last man. And once the dust had settled, and once we got to the end of turn 6, that Black Orc unit, which had gone in there so confidently, nearly full strength, had been ground down to a handful of models. I think it was 2 Black Orcs, the Banner Bearer and the Musician. There might have been 1 more in addition to that. And the Black Orc War Boss on a couple of wounds left. But unfortunately, the rest of the battle went in a similar fashion. My other unit of Halberdiers ended up getting shot to death by the short bows. And even when I tried to send them in to help the Spearmen, it wasn't enough, and they did eventually get basically cut down. They did break and flee and just go off the board. And on the right flank, the other unit of Halberdiers, I'd misplaced them, so they ended up marching forward a bit. They were like, oh, I'll cover the flank against the Trolls. But the Trolls and the Halberdiers never managed to make combat. That tower got in the way of both of us. And with the Trolls continuously failing their stupidity test, and my Halberdiers struggling to wheel and turn because they were such a big unit, the end of the battle meant that the right flank had been completely bloodless, but the middle and the left had been a bloodbath. And we get to the end of the battle, and the final state of both forces is there is 2 Orc war machines left over. The Goblins are about half strength, and the Black Orcs are down to a shattered nubbin of what they had once been. But the Empire have lost 2 years of state troops, my general and my BSB, and lost a couple of unit banners as well in all of the confusion. And so it ends up being a crushing victory to the Orcs. But both sides were battered and bruised. If you take stock of what was left, I had a full unit of Halberdiers and my cannon and my mage left over. And the Orcs had 2 war machines, their general, a handful of Orcs, and a handful of Goblins. So it was a very big victory for the Orcs. But both sides have been damaged, but the key thing was my opponent had wiped out more whole units than I had. I ended up getting some points for, I think, the Rock Lobber, and then some points, 25% of the points for the Black Orcs, and that was about it. So I did lose my first game, but some valuable lessons were learned. Number 1, Orc and Goblin war machines might be numerous, but they are somewhat unreliable. And even with things like the Doom Diver, I feel like cannons are much better at counter battery fire than Rock Lobbers and Doom Divers and Bolt Throwers. If I was to play that game again, I definitely would have used my Steam Tank on the right, and I had that cannon and my Great Cannon, pick up his war machines early on, and then force my opponent to come to me, where I can start picking away at him at range firepower. Realizing that state troops were quite sticky and that even Black Orcs took multiple turns to grind through them, especially when state troops have got a leadership 9 rerollable, was also very valuable. It meant that I could rely upon my troopers to hold. They could hold. Even if they would die, they would hold. But with game number 1 now completed, it was time to go over to the second round and game number 2. And I found myself facing off against the Tomb Kings of Khemri. The undead army list was essentially a starter box. There were 2 20-man skeleton archer units, 1 30-strong skeleton warrior unit with spears and shields. They were also joined by a level 1 lich priest. Then we had a level 4 on a bone dragon, and he was kitted up with a magical staff that made him quite good in combat, especially considering he had taken one of his spells as Spectral Doppelganger. And then we had a Tomb Prince on a chariot in a squad of 2 other chariots, so 3 chariots in total, and a unit of skeletal horse archers. The mission was meeting engagement. This is where you have the diagonal deployment, and also some of your units can be forced to start in reserve. Fortunately for me, none of my units decided to turn up late, and they were all ready to go from the get-go. And for the Tomb Kings, pretty much everything turned up on time. It was just the unit of 8 skeletal horse archers that decided they wanted to go into reserve. As for deployment, I had a unit of halberdiers on the right, and then had my spearmen in the middle. I had another halberdiers on the middle left. I had my cannon behind the lines, ready to yeet cannonballs at that great big dragon. And I also had my steam tank anchoring my left-hand side. And I had that over there because there was a whole bunch of chariots on the opposing left-hand side. And I did not fancy a Tomb Prince wheeling around my flank and getting into the side of my infantry line. So the steam tank this time was doing its job. It was to go on the side where it just needs to lock down a flank and deal with something that I didn't want to deal with. The rest of the Tomb King deployment consisted of his archers on the right-hand side and his skeletons in the middle, and his bone dragon was also on towards the middle left, near to the steam tank as well. Now, when it came to spells, I was on Elementalism again, and this time I got Earthen Ramparts and Wind Blast. And the first thing I did is explain to my opponent, I said, bear in mind, we rolled these spells up well before deployment. I said, Wind Blast lets you, forces you to give ground. If I successfully cast at one of your units, it forces them to give ground, and you can give ground off the board. And he was like, oh, I don't think you can do that. I said, no, you can, and I've even got the FAQ preloaded here, so I can show you, because I knew this was going to come up. It's the reason why I picked Elementalism. A lot of people don't realize that they have FAQ'd it, that you can be forced to give ground off the board. And my opponent went, oh, that's really, really cool. That's really powerful. So you can just like delete units to that thing. And I was like, yeah, it's got a lot of punch if you're not careful. So I said, just try not to go too close to the edge of the board and you should be okay. And my opponent went, yeah, no problem. And then proceeded to deploy, literally like a minute later, both units of skeleton archers on the edge of the board on the right hand flank. And I was like, oh, do I say anything? I was like, well, I've just told him, and I didn't want to say anything in case I was influencing his battle plan. There might have been a reason that he had those over there, but that looked like a real juicy tempting target. And so the moment that those archers went down, they were like the first units he put down. The moment those archers went down there, I put my mage over on that right hand side, and I was ready to start blasting some skelly bobs if the opportunity came up. Bear in mind, I'm only a level 2. My opponent has a level 4 and a level 1. With everyone soldiers down, it was time to get into the game. We roll off for first turn, and huzzah! I'm actually able to win it, which is pretty nice. And I just move up across the line. I realise that my opponent has a lot of archers, and I have a lot of toughness 3 infantry. And whilst I have the war machine advantage, he does have a lot of bows. He's got 40 archers, all with arrows of the asp. They're all hitting on 5s, wounding on 4s. Definitely the opportunity for him to whittle me down so that even my state troops can't take on bloody skeletons in combat. So the steam tank moves up aggressively on the left. The whole infantry line moves up aggressively forward. And I fire my cannon into his skeleton warriors and get a perfect shot, wiping out the full 5 of them with no issues. And that's my turn 1. I think that's pretty good. I've started to whittle down the skeletons. And yeah, I'm putting the pressure on my opponent early. Round 1 for the Tomb Kings First thing they do is arise every single one of those skeletons back. The level 4 turns round, passes the leadership check, gets d6 plus 4 skeletons back. So even if he rolls a 1, he gets all 5 back. And I realise, oh damn, war machines aren't so good in skeletons, and oh damn, raising skeletons back is actually pretty bloody powerful. You completely undid my entire turn 1 damage output with a single leadership check, essentially. The skeletons themselves, the archers and whatnot, basically stay still. They're like, just going to sit there and shoot me. The Tomb Prince and his chariots do go for a long bomb charge onto my steam tank, and they actually get it. My opponent's like, I think it's probably a mistake, but I want to see how it does. And this was actually a really cool thing about this game. Both me and my opponent were kind of using it as an opportunity to sort of stress test things and try things out. So he yeets his chariots into the steam tank, who do no damage, because it's a steam tank. Even his Tomb Prince with the crook and flail of death, whatever it's called, is only winning on 6s. So I think maybe he does like 1 wound to the steam tank, but it's nothing significant whatsoever. And then he unleashes with his archers, and I was my fears were confirmed. He is able to actually pincushion up a couple of my Empire units, and I end up losing 3 halberdiers, and I think I lose almost a full rank as spearmen. It's a pretty good volley, to say the least. Empire turn 2, and I spot the mother of all opportunities. You see, on the right side where my halberdiers were, they had marched onto a hill, and they were now in position to charge a unit of skeleton archers that were on the edge of the board. And it was a 9-inch charge. I needed a 5 or a 6 on one of the dice. But if I get that charge off, it means I'm starting to get into combat, which is great. But more importantly, if I win that combat, then the skeletons are on the edge of the map, and they will be forced to give ground. Even though they're unbreakable in Old World doesn't mean you stay in combat, it means you just give ground. This is why there are rules such as the Nakaran Phalanx ability for skeleton warriors, which allows them to choose to not give ground if they are forced to, as part of their unbreakable. But these are archers, they don't have that rule. So I think if I charge in there, at the very least, I'm going to be in combat, which is great. And at the best case scenario, I might actually drive a full unit of skeletons off the board. So I'm like, screw it, let's go for it. Roll the dice, and I get a 5 and a 6. Go 9 inches, and I go straight into the front arc of those skeleton archers. And then I do the rest of my compulsory moves, and I bring my mage up on top of the hill, so now she can see everywhere that she needs to. And it comes over to shooting, and I put my cannonball into the Bone Dragon, which passes its 5 up regen, and then I do Wind Blast. And the only mage my opponent has in dispel range is his level 1, which fails to stop me from Wind Blasting. And because of the direction that the spell is coming from, and because of the fact that Wind Blast forces you to give ground, that skeleton archer unit gives ground 2 inches backwards, and with a good ½ inch to spare, it gives ground off the board. With a single spell, I've just blown 20 skeletons off the map. And things get even worse for the Tomb Kings when we go over to combat, and my halberdiers not only smash into the skeletons, they also smash the skeletons to dust. I'm able to win the combat by just enough to cause only a few to crumble. They then give ground, and because they were right on the edge of the board, they give ground right off the board as well. Meaning that in one turn, in turn 2, I have deleted 40 of my opponent's infantry. And to rub salt in the wound, the steam tank was still engaged in combat with the Tomb Prince and his chariots, and was slowly grinding them down. I actually ground one of the chariots completely into the dust this turn. I'm not gonna lie, that was a huge blow to the Tomb Kings, and definitely swung the battle into the favor of the Empire. Going into Tomb King's turn 2, they charged their Bone Dragon into a unit of halberdiers, but I challenged, my opponent says he doesn't want to challenge, I challenged with my unit leader, so even though he gets Spectral Doppelganger off, and absolutely bludgeons that unit leader. He does, even with overkill, he does only kill the one model out of the unit, and with their 9-inch rerollable leadership test, they just give ground, and my opponent decides to follow up. On the left hand side, he does arise one of the chariots back, but it just gets ground down again, and because that they're not doing any damage to me, and because that they are losing combat, they are crumbling, the chariots are really in a bad way right now. The steam tank is just grinding over them one at a time. Turn 3 for the Empire, I rely on my halberdiers to hold that dragon in place. Like I said, leadership 90 rollable. I'll just give ground, fall back. I don't mind. Just keep it busy. And then I move my spearmen forward and I reform my halberdiers so that next turn I'll be able to get a double charge onto the big unit of skeleton warriors. Firing for me, this was the turn when I think that my cannon misfired, so it was out for turn 3 and turn 4, and the steam tank proceeds to, over my combat turn 3 and combat for the Tomb Kings turn 3, essentially grind down the chariots to the point where there's just the Tomb Prince left and he's on like 1 wound. For the Tomb Kings turn 3, the Bone Dragon starts munching on the halberdiers, but my opponent fails to get Spectral Doppelganger off. It's actually a relatively high level spell. Sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But he still was able to do a decent amount of damage to the unit thanks to the dragon just chomping down. And he does win the combat. I fall back in good order and he follows up. I'm only falling back like 1 or 2 inches at a time, so it's almost like I'm pseudo giving ground, but my opponent still counts as charging, which is, I guess, big for him. My opponent's skeleton warriors unfortunately tried to go for a charge on their turn 3, but they didn't make it, and it comes over to turn 4 for the Empire, and I slam 2 units into those skeleton warriors, and I do a lot of damage. Over the course of my turn 4 and the Tomb King's turn 4, they are all cut down or crumbled into dust. And crucially, in my opponent's turn 4, he doesn't manage to arise. He fails leadership. It's only leadership 8 on a level 4 mage. It's kind of crazy. So he fails leadership, doesn't arise, and that's what allows me to crumble them over both rounds of turn 4. For my halberdiers, they continue to just grind it out with the dragon. My opponent does get Spectral Doppelganger off, but he only gets like 3 hits from it. And so even though I lose basically a full rank overall at this point, I'm still not significantly outnumbered. I'm still able to pass those leadership checks. But we get to the end of round 4. I should say the steam tank grinds over the Tomb Prince and completely crushes him. We get to the end of round 4 and my opponent has got the Bone Dragon left. He brings his horse archers in from reserve because at this point my infantry line has got far enough ahead from the maid where she's actually exposed, and he does actually shoot at her, but unfortunately for him he only gets 1 wound through. And so the game is all but over at this point, because after I destroy the skeletons in turn 4, I reform at the end. I successfully reform my halberdiers, and I'm able to then charge into the skeleton horsemen, which have just come on in my opponent's turn 4. I charge them in my turn 5, and my halberdiers crush those skeleton horsemen, no problems whatsoever. And so the rest of the game, sort of turn 5, turn 6, essentially consists of me just moving away from the Bone Dragon with everything that I can. My halberdiers just getting munched on turn after turn. One turn I actually do manage to stop Spectral Doppelganger with my level 2. I actually get like the double 6 with my maid, which is awesome. And the steam tank tries to get in there, but by the time it gets there, it's too late. And so the final picture of the battle, we have the Bone Dragon, which has taken a couple of wounds, but that's about it. And everything else the Tomb King army is down. The Empire haven't actually lost a full unit, and the halberdiers aren't below 25%. So it ends up being a crushing victory to the Empire, and the Tomb Kings are forced to go back to sleep underneath their pyramids. So with one win and one loss under my belt, it was time to go into round number 3, the final battle of the tournament, and it was against Warriors of Chaos. Now, for those of you that don't know, I have a really bad track record against Chaos in Warhammer Fantasy. Growing up when I was a kid, I had goblins, my brother had Chaos, and he always beat me. When I got back into Fantasy towards the end of 8th edition, I continued to really struggle against this army. They're just so difficult to kill. They're so choppy, and in a game which is just all about close combat, where everything is decided on the sharp end, being the faction that is the best at choppy is a big advantage in my mind. And I've actually played a lot of games against them in the old world, where Alex and I was doing some practice before various events and just getting into the game and learning the rules and all that kind of good stuff. So overall, I would say I have a very poor win-loss ratio against the Forces of Darkness. But despite this, I was actually pretty upbeat. I was looking forward to the game because I was just enjoying playing Oldwood. I had 2 amazing games so far, and I knew that this third one was going to be a good battle as well. And whatever happens, it was going to be a good learning experience. Now, in the opposing army list, there was a Chaos Demon Prince of Khorne, a couple of Lone Chaos Spawn, a unit of Chaos Hounds, and then 3 units of Marauders. One with the mark of Tzeentch, which had a Chaos Sorcerer Lord in there, level 4, so a good bit of magic power there. And then 2 had the mark of Khorne. There was also a unit of Chosen Chaos Knights. They had full plate armor, barding, and shields, but they didn't have lances. My opponent reasoning that, well, they have ensorcel weapons as standard, and AP-1 is more than enough in a lot of situations. I actually really liked this Chaos list. It contained a mixture of fast movers such as the Demon Prince, the Hounds and the Knights. There's a solid core of line infantry and a few wandering monsters, and the Mage gave the force some decent power when it came to ranged attacks as well, and some magic missiles and things like that. The mission for Battle 3 was Mountain Pass. This is the one where you essentially deploy on the short table edge and you've got a long way to march to each other to start fighting. Not going to lie, this was a bit of an advantage for me. The fact that I have got a cannon and I've also got my steam tank means that I can sit back and blast away with my artillery a little bit, and the Chaos are going to be forced to come a long way if they want to get into combat with me. With that in mind, I carefully pre-measured my deployment, because you can actually pre-measure things now in Oldwood, which is a big change from the old Warhammer Fantasy. I correctly predicted that my opponent was going to put everything on the very edge of his deployment zone. And so what I did is, from his Marauder units, I made sure that I was at least 3 turns of marching away. That meant if you marched 8 inches, first turn, second turn, and then third turn, that was when he was only just going to be able to get into combat with a charge. It would be a relatively short charge, but a charge going into his turn 4. This would give me 3 rounds of shooting at him minimum, and maybe even 4 rounds of shooting if I got to go first. Of course, this wouldn't help me against some of his faster units, but it meant that at the very least I could stagger the charges of the Chaos, and I could try and deal with his army bit by bit as it came in the successive waves. Now, like I said, my opponent did deploy everything on the line, and he had his Demon Prince on the right hand side with a unit of Chaos Hounds and a Chaos Spawn. Then in the middle he had 2 units of Khorne Marauders and his Sorcerer in the big unit of Tzeentch Marauders, and then on the left he had another Chaos Spawn and the 5 Chosen Knights. As for my own deployment, I put my state troops in their usual battle formation. I had halberdiers on the left, anchored with a tower covering their flank, and then I had my spearmen in the centre and my halberdiers on the right. Where I mixed things up is I put the cannon on the right flank. Now, this was a little risky. There was a Demon Prince over there, there was some Chaos Hounds over there, but without the cannon over there, it would have just been the halberdiers taking all of that on. And I don't think they could have done it, and I think they would have potentially broken, and that would have opened my flank. So I put the cannon there, so I had some cannonballs and some grape shot ready to unleash onto anything that got too close and could help soften things up and maybe give the halberdiers a chance to win some combats. I put my mage towards that side as well, and then on the extreme left flank I had my steam tank, and this was following the battle plan of I don't want to have to deal with those chosen knights. I've faced chosen knights before, they're horrendously powerful. Nothing in my army could deal with them except the steam tank, and my steam tank went down last, so I was able to use it to counter deploy and go after those chaos knights, and that was just my flank anchored. Now I can't remember exactly who placed down the last unit. It may have been me with the aforementioned steam tank. There may have been a chaos spawn that got placed down, but regardless, I was able to win the roll off and I got the first turn, which is always nice when you've got the firepower advantage. Turn 1 was very straightforward for me. Steam tank pootled forward. I made sure that it went forward far enough that it was a threat for the Chaos Knights. It wouldn't be able to really avoid it. If they tried to, it might be able to get them in the flank, but also not so far that they'd be able to get a turn 1 charge on it. I kept all of my Empire State troops still, and then I fired with my 2 cannons, my steam cannon and also with my great cannon. Now the great cannon was able to do a number of wounds to one of the Khorne Marauder units, bounced the cannonball through, and I think it almost hit the Demon Prince as well. It sort of went over the corner of his base, and so that meant that there was almost a chance to kill the Demon Prince, except for he made his 4+ ward save. Boo! If I'd got that Demon Prince round 1, holy moly, that would have been huge. But the Dark Gods protected it. And then my steam tank fired its steam cannon into the Tzeentch Marauders and was able to kill 3 or 4 of them. So a couple of good cannonball shots. It was at this point in the tournament I really started to be able to dial in the cannonballs, get a good idea of where to place them, 10 inches from the back of the unit. And so the only thing that was really stopping my cannonballs from hitting at this point was a misfire on the artillery dice. But with that opening bombardment done, we go over to the Chaos Forces, and they march everything forward. The Chaos Hounds go really fast forward. They've got like a vanguard move, and they can march like 14 inches. So they start getting into my face early on. And the Demon Prince then goes for Gaze of the Gods and rolls a 1. And even with a reroll, rolls a 1. So the Demon Prince was stupid. That didn't matter in this round. He did pass his leadership test, but let me tell you, that will come back. We'll hear from the stupid Demon Prince again in future turns. Everything else marches forward as you would expect. I think the spawn randomly moved forward. And then we get to the Chaos Knights, and my opponent ums and ahs whether he wants to move them forward, but decides that these are Chaos Knights. If in doubt, they were going to go forward. At the very least, he can see what it's like for them to take on a steam tank. So he does move them pretty far forward. But that's it for his turn. He gets a few spells off. He does a spell that allows his unit to move far. Things like Dark Steed or Steed of Shadows, something like that. But it might not have been something like that. But it's a conveyance spell that allowed him to move his Marauders forward a good distance, whilst at the same time still being able to cast magic, because you can't march and do magic missiles at the same time. So he was moving forward, keeping the line together, while still allowing him to do some cool magic stuff. We go over to Empire turn 2, and the steam tank declares a charge into the Chaos Knights. I ummed and ahed about this. I wasn't sure if I wanted to try and blast them with the steam cannon and the steam gun, but I was like, no, this is a perfect opportunity to get in there and get some impact hits. And I slam into the front of the Chaos Knights, and I get the maximum number of impact hits, and then I also get a really good number of stomps. But my opponent rolls his 4-up saves like a beast, like an absolute mega boss. And despite the fact that I think I get an almost perfect hit from the steam tank, he only loses 2 of his knights. But in return, they do 0 damage to the steam tank. And so overall, the steam tank actually wins that combat, because both units have got close order, and my opponent has a banner, but he's done no wounds to me, and I have done 2 wounds to him. So I win the combat by 1, and so my opponent is forced to use his stubborn on his chosen knights, so they no longer have that, so they fall back in good order. And also he loses frenzy, because these were Khorne chosen knights. As for the rest of my turn 2, the state troops held the line, and then the cannon unleashed grape shot into the corn dogs and was able to kill 3 of them. I was a little unlucky with my wounds, but even with them being 2 of them left, and they did pass their panic check, I was confident that they'd essentially been neutralized. Sure, this meant that the 2 of them could fit through the gap and could charge my cannon, but they've only got 2 attacks. They're only like weapon skill 3. So there's a real chance that they charge in, don't do anything to the cannon crew, and the cannon crew might actually be able to fight their way out of that. That's assuming they make what is a somewhat long charge for them. Speaking of charges though, we go over to the Chaos turn 2, and the Knights charge back into the steam tank. They do this even though they don't think they're going to hurt it, because they don't want the steam tank to be able to get impact hits on them. And then we have the corn dogs who fail their charge into the cannon. It was slightly set back, or quite a bit set back from the halberdiers, so there was quite a long way for them to go, but even so, my opponent just rolled really badly on his charge and didn't make it. The Demon Prince comes flying forward, but isn't quite in charge range this turn. The Spawn bimbles forward, and the Chaos Marauders also march forward with the Corn guys, and again my opponent does his conveyance spell to move forward with his mage, and this time he's in magic missile range, and he's able to unleash lots of magic missiles, and he does some damage to one of my Empire state troop units, wiping out sort of 3 or 4 of the enemy from there. My mage wasn't able to stop all the spells, although I do think I did manage to stop one of his magic missiles, which is kind of cool. As for combat this turn, there was just the steam tank. Now my opponent had not only put the Chaos Knights into the front of it, but he'd also put a Chaos Spawn into the side of it. Sadly, they did no damage. Just couldn't get through the toughness of the steam tank. Maybe I lost 1 wound at this point. I think the steam tank had taken 2 in total, 1 that had done to itself by steam power and 1 from one of the Chaos Knights or the Chaos Spawn, but basically they didn't do much damage to me whatsoever. And my steam tank in return squashed the Chaos Spawn, because it's nowhere near as hard to kill as the Knights, and by squashing it I managed to win the combat again, because my opponent no longer had a flank charge. The only thing that he had to his name was close order and a banner, and I did 3 wounds to the Spawn and also had close order. This time I broke the Chaos Knights, and I was able. They did flee, and I was able to chase after them, chase them down, and kill them with the steam tank. Even though they had Swift Stride and everything, my opponent didn't get a particularly high roll, and the steam tank did really well on its pursuit and just ran over and flattened the supposed chosen of the Blood God. I'm not gonna lie, that was a rough turn for my opponent. Failing the charge with the War Dogs meant that he didn't take the cannon out of the equation, and losing 2 units to a charge you instigated is really, really spicy. We go over to turn 3 for the Empire, and my steam tank is somewhat out of it now. A lot of the battle line has moved on from there, so it just essentially reforms. It does its steam power, and it just turns on the spot essentially and does a pivot. That's all it does. Just starts to get back towards the center of the battlefield. Over on the right hand side, the cannon crew grape shot the hounds again. This time they go down, and the Empire line braces itself for a charge from the Demon Prince, but it doesn't come. My opponent on his turn 3 marches his corn units forward, so they are pretty close to my Empire now. They're right in my face, and his sorcerer moves forward again as per usual, but it's a little bit behind the rest of the corn guys that are going in. And then the Demon Prince fails its stupidity test, and so what should have been a turn 3 charge by a Demon Prince, it just stumbles forward a handful of inches and doesn't connect. That was huge. That was a really, really big deal. Just having that extra turn of breathing room meant that when it comes over to Empire turn 4, the initiative swung over to me. Now my opponent thought I was going to spend turn 4 just shooting him again. After all, I could shoot Demon Prince with a cannon, and I could just get ready to take the charge from his guys. I could use earthen ramparts potentially to set up a nice defense position, but no. Turn 4, I've got a lot of Chaos Warriors, a lot of Chaos Marauders, I should say, in my face, and they have been whittled down, and they are also not particularly large units in general, and I figured, well, I should charge them. So reform the line! Reform the line! We take them head on! Sound the horn! To the drum beat in the state troops, to the horns behind the lines. The Empire line charged, and it was crushing. My halberdiers went into a small unit of marauders and crushed them to a man, overran and went into the unit of Tzeentch marauders that were behind, instigating combat there, meaning that my opponent in his turn wouldn't be able to cast any magic because he was stuck in combat. Against the other unit of Khorne marauders, my spearmen went in and was able to, because they're led by my general, even though they're not getting many spear attacks, between the general, the BSB, and the 4 other spearmen, including the champion on the front rank, we were able to cut down the majority of the front rank of the Chaos Marauders, and that meant we won the combat big time, and we drove them back as well. They fell back in good order, and we drove them forward and then caught them and re-engaged in combat with them. There wasn't many of them left, though, to be honest. And that was my turn 4. Goes over to the Chaos turn 4, and they get the Demon Prince to combat with the rightmost halberdiers, and I issue a challenge. So turn 4, the Chaos, for the Demon Prince, all it does is kill a unit champion. And then disaster. Because he had fallen back in good order against my spearmen, I countered charging there, and because I had also overrun into his Tzeentch marauders, I countered charging there. And so I am able to just cut down and both the front rank of both those units, and I break both of them. I catch the Khorne marauders, completely catch them, and then the other unit of marauders breaks as well. Just fails the leadership check. And they flee, but I don't catch them. But what was epic about that last combat is my opponent issued a challenge with his Chaos Sorcerer Lord. All I had was a unit champion in there, and I accepted. And my unit champion won the combat. I don't know what the mathematical statistical likelihood of a unit of an Empire State Trooper Sergeant beating a Chaos Sorcerer Lord is, but it can't be high. My opponent rolls his attacks, only gets 2 hits, rolls to wound, gets snake eyes. My halberdier sergeant turns round and manages to take a wound off the Chaos Sorcerer Lord. He doesn't kill the guy in combat, but he draws blood. He draws first blood, and upon seeing their Sorcerer Lord fail against this paragon of the Empire, imbued by the spirit of Sigmar himself, like I said, they broke and fled. Now I didn't catch them, but this end of this turn 4, is my opponent's turn 4. Their army is shattered. They've lost 2 full units of marauders. There's a Chaos Spawn knocking about the place, which dies to my turn 5, essentially. There's a Chaos Demon Prince, and that's it. Going into turn 5, my steam tank charges the fleeing marauders, but because it charges them on the side, they just flee sideways a little bit, and then my halberdiers charge them, and because you can only make 1 flee move a turn, they can't go any further away, and I make the connection, and because they're fleeing, they are utterly obliterated. And that seals the game right there. Over the course of turn 5, turn 6, the Chaos Spawn goes down, and the Demon Prince essentially just whacks into the halberdiers and is successful in killing most of them. There's actually 1 round of combat that they managed to win because he flubs his attacks, which caused them to lose frenzy. And so he does take a couple of wounds to instability, but by the time we get to the end of turn 6, there's a Demon Prince left on 1 wound. That's all that the Chaos have left. And the Empire, most of our army's intact. The steam tank is above half health. My spearmen are doing good. My halberdiers are doing good. The only unit that the left-hand halberdiers are doing good. The only unit that's in a bad way is the right-hand side halberdiers, but they weren't in a position. They weren't below 25%. And so it was another crushing victory for the Emperor's true finest. Which Emperor, you may ask? Well, naturally, with my army being a mercenary company, it was the Emperor that was paying us the most. And with game 3 over, we get to the end of the tournament. And the Empire had managed to go 2-1, which I was pretty happy with. I went into this thing expecting to go 0-3. I had 0 expectations, but in the end, managed to do all right. And I was pretty proud with that result. But overall, regardless of if I won any games or not, the main thing was I had a ton of fun. Every game, including the first one, when I got smashed, I just had a big grin on my face. And I really, really enjoyed playing Old World. Competitively, casually, I just really like playing this game. Now, there were a few lessons learned, a few things, a few takeaways from the whole experience. Firstly, generally speaking about Old World, the games were really quick. I know it was only a 1250 point tournament, but the TOs had put aside about 2.5 hours for each round. And it was a beginner tournament, and yet we had so much time. Everyone was finishing their games with a good half hour to spare, to the point where the TOs were like, do you just want to start the next round? I was like, yeah, let's just go for it, let's just get started. It was really quick turnarounds on the games, and this is something that I noticed not only in this Old World tournament that I was at, but spoiler alert, I went to another one as well, and I was doing another after act report on that, and that was a 2000 point one, and the same thing happened there. 3-hour rounds, and we had half an hour finish by the end. Old World's a much, much quicker game than things like Warhammer 40k, where you find yourself scrabbling for every last minute, and the idea of like talking out turns in Old World just isn't going to be a thing because most games end pretty quickly. But I don't want people getting the wrong end of the stick. It's not ending because someone's been smashed inside of 2 turns, although that can happen. There's just a very quick turnaround. You do a couple of bits in your turn, and then you hand over to your opponent. They do a couple of bits in their turn 1, then they hand back to you. The first 2 or 3 turns are actually really fast, and things only start slowing down a bit when you get into combat, but even then there's not so many dice being rolled. You know, a unit with a lot of attacks is rolling maybe like 10 or 11 attacks, versus something like in 40k, again using that as an example, which has hundreds of dice being rolled, dozens and dozens from just single units. Also, interesting side note, this tournament was playing on the 60 by 44 size boards, the 40k size ones, rather than the usual 6 by 4 that is recommended for Old World. Now, at 1250 points, this did not make any difference at all. It actually felt like the right size board for the game. But I can tell you, when you go up 2000 points, you really want that 6 by 4. But if you're a gaming hall who's thinking of setting up some tournaments and you've only got 60 by 44s, go for it. Just run them as 1250 point events and you won't have any complaints or issues whatsoever. Or if you're someone that is looking to get into the game and you've got a battle map, which is one of the smaller 40k ones, again, they are really, really, really good for those 1250 point battles. And I have to say, I like playing Old World at 1250. It almost feels like the game is designed for that points level. After scaling up to 2k and playing a few games of that outside of this tournament, it is good, and I do like 2k, but 1250 is a very, very nice way to play the game. Now, that's a few summary thoughts on Old World in general. Now I want to just give you some hot takes about Empire specifically. When I put this list together, a lot of people said that it wouldn't do very well because state troops are trash, and I want to push back against that. I'm not saying state troops are amazing, and if you take them and dial them up with all the upgrades, they get pretty bloody expensive. But I found that my halberdiers were pretty cheap at just 6 points a model, and 50% of the time, they won the fights convincingly, and 50% of the time, they lost the fights convincingly. And that's because they're just average. When you're punching down the skeletons, your state troops feel good. And when you're trying to go toe-to-toe with black orcs, state troops feel like they're out of their element. But even in that latter scenario, if you take them in sufficient numbers in big bricks, you'll find that they can grind things out. A lot of people say right now that Empire should go pure cavalry. I think you want cavalry. I think my list is definitely not as good because it doesn't have cavalry in it. But I think you still want to go into battle no matter what the point size is, whether it's 1250 or 2000, with at least 1 brick of state troops. You need a nice large unit that in some games could just take a charge and absorb it and just grind it out, be a bit of a tar pit. And in other games, you're going to want that big unit state troops to be able to go on the offensive and start bullying some other enemy line infantry. Last point on state troops, I found that when they were taking on other people's basic infantry, they were fine. They were more than fine. They were in their element. It was only when they were trying to take on special and rare choices where they just didn't have a chance. And that's probably right for a unit like state troops, who are fundamentally a core unit. Core on core, they're fine. Outside of core on core, that's when they're going to basically just become a tar pit. Another really good unit for the Empire is the steam tank. My god, did my steam tank do some work. In the first game, I misused it and it died. It's not invincible, but when used well, it is a very, very valuable commodity. How I found it used best was to lock down a flank and just to look at a situation that I knew my state troops weren't going to be able to handle and go, I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to deal with that. I don't want that to come in there and just start destroying everything. So I'm just going to yeet my steam tank into it. And at the very least, my steam tank will just hold it up. For example, like, chosen knights, at the very least, it's going to hold them up. And best case scenario, I actually win that and the steam tank is able to overrun the enemy. In 2 of my games, when I started using my steam tank properly and I stuck to that plan of locking down a side and just sending it into the hardest enemy unit, in both of those games, it did really, really well. I know some people might think that's kind of sucky, that you have to take a steam tank, but you don't. There are other units which can emulate the steam tank. What makes it so good is it's unbreakable, and it's got a lot of wounds and it's quite tough. But you could emulate that with something like flagellants. Now sure, flagellants aren't as tough, nowhere near as tough as a steam tank, but they are unbreakable. And you can get a unit of 20 of them instead of a steam tank and actually save 5 points into the bargain as well. So it's not that you need a steam tank, it's that you need something that is just an immovable brick. And if you're not a fan of steam tanks, you think that they're too rare in the lore, that they shouldn't be in every Empire army, definitely consider something like flagellants. As long as you've got some brick of unbreakable, you need that in your Empire army, because there's always going to be a flank that you just need to lock down and secure so you can work on the other areas of the battlefield. Last thing I want to talk about is cannons. When I first started using Old World, I was really unimpressed by cannons. I was struggling to get them to connect, and they just were either overshooting or undershooting. Now I've got the science down to a T. You want to place that cannonball 10 inches from the back of the unit. If you do that, even if you get a big overshoot, you'll still hit. And typically, unless you roll a misfire, it'll probably go a sufficient distance forward between the overshoot and then the bounce to hit perfectly every single time. Since I started placing cannonballs 10 inches from the back, the only thing that has stopped those cannonballs from connecting has been a misfire. Otherwise, it has been laser accurate. Now, a lot of people from 8th edition fantasy will be very worried about hearing this, because cannons were a big problem in that game. I think cannons are actually, a lot of people saying they're underpowered in 10th edition. I think they're perfectly powered. You can get very accurate with them, and after just a dozen games, half a dozen games, you'll just start hitting them every time, of course, outside of misfires. But they're not so powerful that they'll blow away a unit in one go. What I have found is cannons, if you have 1 or 2 of them and you concentrate fire on a unit, even then, even if it's like a big unit like a dragon or like a gorgon or some other sort of big beastie, it'll probably take a couple of rounds before you bring it down. And that's with like multiple cannons. A battery of cannons, 2 or 3 of them, concentrated with a bit of luck, might bring down a big thing in one turn, but then you're really speccing into artillery. I think that even up until 2,000 points, you want 3 artillery pieces max. Me personally, I think at 1250, having 2 cannons or a steam tank and a cannon is perfect. And at 2,000 points, I'm looking at taking 1 cannon, 1 steam tank, and 1 Hellblaster volley gun. And let me tell you, Hellblaster is an insanely good weapon. I took it to not this tournament, but another one, and it was an absolute death machine. But you know what? That's a story for another time, for another after action report. Oh, I know, I am blue balling you guys. But I hope you really, really enjoyed today's video. If you did, make sure you smash the like button and leave lots and lots of comments down below. Let me know what you thought and what other kind of armies you want to see me take. Do you want to take more Empire Infantry? Do you want me to take more Empire Cavalry? Or not Empire at all? Are there other factions that you're interested in seeing me take to 1250 points, 2000 point tournaments? And what kind of after action reports do you want to see for the old world? Like I said, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to smash the like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian Glory Hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, the people who have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a heartfelt thank you to Alex Dengal, Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, Try Again Bragg, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Barney. Seriously guys, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Your support is incredible and it makes a huge difference. Thank you so much. That's all for now. Hope you've all enjoyed today's video, and of course, as always, see you guys next time.